Hey guys, Mike here, and I am with Andrea Zoellner.
Zollner.
Zoellner, apologies. It's a beautiful looking surname, but I had absolutely no idea how to pronounce that. And you're with SiteGround, is that right?
That's correct.
Fantastic. Now, basically, I saw you talk at London, at WordCamp London, about, you call it micro copy.
That's right. Yes.
And I really just wanted to pick your brain. So first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope you're well.
I'm well. Thanks so much. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for asking. Yeah, it's very muggy here in the UK. Um, So microcopy is something, even as someone who runs like funnel businesses and stuff, I'd never heard that phrase before. And yet when you kind of went over it, I noticed so many, and even now I go through things and I'm like, oh my God, we've been missing out on all this stuff. At a high level overview, can you take us through what you mean by microcopy?
Absolutely. So I think writing in the design industry and in marketing has really been evolving. And we are coming up with all these new words to describe all the different parts. Even the word copy, if you don't work in marketing, I kind of have to explain what copywriting means, why it's different from writing articles, or what that means also in web design. And so microcopy is just one of these new words that we've come up with to designate small pieces of text that you have in UX design.
Yep.
And so the reason why it's micro is because generally these are 1 to 8 word strings of text.
Yep.
And you'll see those everywhere. So
Yeah.
if you go on a website, that's, the different buttons that you have, the text that are on those buttons, or if you have like a checkout process or a funnel, of course, that's a great example of places where you have little bits of text kind of peppered throughout your website that seem small and insignificant, but people pick up on them subconsciously, consciously. These are things that people are reading. So yeah, that's microcopy in a nutshell.
And this was, as you were going through it, it's interesting because at a few points at WordCamp, there were also other people talking about UX, and people were kind of sneaking the term funnel in there, which I'm seeing more and more throughout the UX process. And microcopy obviously has a huge, and again, as you kind of go, and we'll share some of those examples, it was a lot about that kind of conversion journey and does the user know what the next step is? And it really opens your eyes as to actually, like you say, it's menus, it's call to action buttons, it's the click button. There's a lot of it out there and it's not really being paid attention to.
No, it isn't. I think a lot of people, when they get started making their own websites or even, in online marketing, they're doing it by themselves
Yeah.
and they're building their businesses off of templates and things that other people have built, which is really the way to do it. I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you want to start a new project. When you're working with things like WordPress, you have a huge community of developers and designers and content marketers who have been there before you. So it's great to have that kind of foundation to work off of. The only problem with that is that a lot of these templates are the same and people underestimate
Yeah.
the need to customize them. And so I think the reason why this is becoming increasingly interesting and important is as people develop their businesses and as they get to know their target audiences better, I think they're realizing that targeting the words and targeting the way that we write to our audiences can make a big difference. And that, plays down to the word that we use for a confirmation button or, down to these really minuscule pieces. And we have the power to edit these templates. So I'm encouraging everyone to do that. And that's sort of what the message was in my WordCamp talk.
Yeah. And so kind of let's begin to talk about that then. Where do we start then? Because it was a little bit almost overwhelming because I thought, well, that's our menus we need to redo. Oh, and our Facebook ad call to action buttons. Oh, and the actual click through button on the sales page. There's a lot, and the most common one for me is sign up in a box when it's like the email address and then sign up. And I hate that. And I was like, why do I hate that? And then your talk kind of opened up. Actually, there's a world here of blending it between what's going to make people take action. What do they want to see? Does our avatar read something? Like, where do we even start with something like this?
I know it is quite overwhelming because when you start looking at all the text, it just feels endless. And that's
Yeah.
a normal feeling to have, I think. And that's pretty much true with any project is um, sort of prioritizing what's going to have the biggest impact. And so I would say this probably sounds like a boring step, but a content audit is usually a good place to start.
Yep.
And part of that audit is thinking about your business and about your tools, and what is the number one metric that is helping you achieve success. If it's sales, work your way back from that and say, okay, what is going to get the person who's going through my website to finalize that sale? And, kind of highlight those steps that are going to get them there. And that's probably where you'll get your biggest bang for your buck effort wise, when editing your content and editing your copy. If it's more abstract than that, if you're trying to build sort of a brand awareness, or if you're a nonprofit, for example, and you want people to gain knowledge, think about the pages that have the biggest impact for your readers to get to. And are they getting to those pages? Then work your way back from there and make sure that path is as easy as possible.
So again, it makes sense when it's kind of laid out like that. What are some of the areas that we need to look at? Because it's kind of one of those areas, because I think someone at the talk even asked you about split testing, which I always think is very dangerous, because I think people change too much. What is it on the page? Let's say we've got a pretty standard, I don't know, it's a squeeze page with an opt-in form, and maybe it has a menu and stuff at the bottom. What do I want to start thinking about in terms of what are my options? Does it have to be sign up or click here? Because there's a lot of variations. I see a lot of people do different things, and maybe that actually might be bad practice. Is there any kind of guidance on that?
There probably is. I think I tend to, I sort of tend to go slowly with those things, because I'm not a developer, and I am new to the idea of split testing and how you do all those operations. And so I would say my technique at the moment is probably not the best practice, but there is more and more literature on how to do a really good split test, and design wise, what is too much and what is not enough, and what's going to allow you to really make informed decisions. In terms of trying different things, if you're hesitating between two different buttons, I like to do some competitive analysis as well, and some competitive research, see what similar websites are using on their checkout forms and in their sign up forms, seeing maybe there's some lingo that is going around and is more trendy these days that I'd want to try. So in terms of like coming up with what exactly you're going to change on your site, that's one way of approaching it. I also think, if you're making these decisions internally, then you can also come up with your own focus groups just within your own company, pulling people from different departments, or even having people that are using your website weigh in on what they'd like to see. And coming up with a list like that and brainstorming can be a good place to start. But yeah, testing can be overwhelming, and if you do too much too quickly, then you're probably muddying your results.
And my takeaway from kind of your talk and that question being asked was actually being aware that microcopy is its own thing, in my opinion, was kind of more important than doing the split testing. I actually think split testing is kind of overrated in some of those respects, because just being aware of that button saying sign up compared to something else, after we've done the audit, what can we then begin to look at next then? What, like you said, we should focus. Take us through some of those areas we should be looking at.
Right. So you can easily on your website look at the pages that are getting the highest amount of hits on your website, and evaluating where your traffic is heading, and if that's a place that you want to focus on. If your landing page, if you have more landing pages and more visitors on landing pages than you do on your home page, then you want to just make sure that you're keeping tabs on all of those pages, and that you're updating them and keeping them fresh, and that they're consistent with the rest of your website. So part of the content audit is just knowing what you're working with, and where your site, what kind of pages you have on your site, and where your traffic is heading, and which ones are getting the most traffic. That way, when you do start making changes, you can start with those pages that most people are viewing. So that's my first thing about a content audit, because content audits can be just unwieldy and overwhelming. And so the best place to start is the pages that are being viewed. In my WordCamp talk, I kind of focused on a couple of different areas, because I thought those were probably the most common for people. And they were low-hanging fruit, so to say. And so the menu is one of them. Information architecture is its own field, and it's fascinating. And You have UX designers and library science experts that are working on how we archive the internet and how we organize our information. So I'm not going to, kind of speak as an expert in that, but I think the way that you label your menu items, the way you organize them, that's a really great place to start evaluating whether you're really making the most of the template that you're using, and or if you're just following sort of these common practices without thinking of them. That's a place to stop and look and say, does this match my content, and does it match the audience that's engaging with my content? Are they finding what they're looking for, or am I misrepresenting what's on the page with the label I've chosen for my menu? Another easy thing are, if you have a footer area, you have extra information down there. Sometimes people have contact, call to actions in their footer, or they have a pop-up that pops up that's programmed into their footer. And so these are places like that people will see immediately upon arriving on your site. Those are probably places that you want to start reworking, because within the first few seconds, we all know that that's the biggest impression that people have when they land on your site. Within the first few seconds, they'll decide if they, think you're professional, if you are what they were looking for to begin with, and if they're going to trust you and think that you're valuable to them. And so I think, thinking about those first few seconds and the words that people are going to be seeing is a really great place to start.
That's interesting, because I've always got a thing about when anyone clicks a button, I want to be really aware of what they're going to do next. I want it to say like, add this to cart, because I want it to be clear that that's the thing that they should do. And yet on the other side, it can be a bit kind of wishy-washy. I think a lot of people, and the biggest thing, kind of going back to something else you mentioned, is it changes per page. I've seen so many buttons and calls to actions and menu items and things that change the wording that they use for that, essentially the same thing, the same item or page, change per page, as opposed to being consistent with their business or the site. Is that something that you do see a lot of? Is that something that does need to be fixed?
Yeah, I love promoting consistency in a lot of situations. I think, if you're trying to have a brand voice, which is something that I think in marketing people are starting to understand, not only applies to individuals, but it applies to businesses as well. What is your brand voice? What's your brand persona? If I were to meet your brand in a bar, who would that person be to me? And how would they speak? How would they act? What kind of feeling would I have? And so as people start to narrow in on what their brand persona is, then it gives them hopefully gives you a clearer idea of what kind of words you're going to use in your website and if you have an app or a newsletter, any part of your business that has written content, that should be a consistent tone of voice. Now, I think that there's a lot of new scenarios popping up in which that contradict things that I used to think and I used to believe. And so, when you're thinking about a big business like SiteGround, for example, like we're an international web hosting company. So our audience can be quite diverse. And so as a brand, we've chosen a certain tone of voice, and we've chosen to present ourselves in the way that most feels authentic for us. But we realize that when we're talking to small business owners and we're talking to developers who make websites for a living, these are different audiences and they want to hear different things as well. So I really think that, depending on the size of your business or your organization and the size of the audience that you're targeting, you want to both be consistent with who you are and also make sure that you're making the decisions that best serve your business. And that might mean having a couple of different approaches for different audience members.
And this beautifully segues into the thing that you talked about. I think was that really highlighted everything about micro-compete. What do I call my blog? and the examples you gave were really clear. Are you able to go over that a little bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the blog, most websites have a blog section. And so it kind of feels like an obvious choice to call it a blog, because when we're talking about WordPress, WordPress came about first as a blog. And so that seems to be the terminology that's stuck around. But it might not be appropriate for your particular situation. I'm saying yours, and like if you're listening and you have a blog, but it's not really blog posts that you're sharing in that section. Maybe you're using the blog function that's built into WordPress, but what you're sharing is academic articles, then blog doesn't really match that. And so in my talk, I gave a couple of examples, and one of them was a tech magazine. And so they have articles, but they also have an online blog. And so in their situation, blog was the best fit for that section of their site. But then we also, looked at an organization or company that does outsourced documentation. Very professional company, sort of very traditional in the sense that they were presenting themselves as a service, offering a service. And so, their section was actually articles because they were sharing information about their documentation practices, and it was an opportunity for them to show off a more professional side. And I feel like the word article kind of, if you think about law or you think about journalism, you think of these more traditional forms of writing. And so article was the best fit. And then my third example was MIT, because they had a blog section. But what it really was, it wasn't like think pieces, or it wasn't these long, editorial pieces that they were publishing. It was news about campus. It was news about research. And so they labeled their blog section news. So news, articles, blog, the structure of the site was very similar, but the content that they had on their blog were very different. And by making that small change and that small tweak in the wording, it sort of sets the expectation for the reader, the navigator on the site, that they're going to see something specific when they click on that menu item. They're gonna have an idea already before the page loads of what's there. And I think that's really the key to microcopy, is making sure that you're setting accurate expectations as people are navigating your site.
Yeah, and that was a kind of a very strong theme throughout your talk, was what you're essentially giving people is the next step. And it has to be really obvious to them, like, oh, this is the next thing I need to do, and that's the button that I need to click. And blog was a really good example. What we found was we generate 90% of our traffic through our blog, through posts being ranked, and we used to call it something. It was something dumb. I was trying to be clever, basically. It was like funnel assistance or funnel help. I can't even remember. And as soon as I because I was like, well, it's about funnels, right? But as soon as I changed it to blog, our traffic actually jumped up, and people were navigating back to it. It was almost as if people were landing on the post and then being like, well, I want to see more of this stuff, but they don't have a blog. So where do I navigate to the blog? And just calling it what it was for our audience, predominantly marketers and a lot of content experts, that's what they wanted to see. But as you're right, it's a lot of the time the audience, it's going to vary depending on what they want to see, right? And maybe that goes for the same for calls to action as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Your call to action has to match the action that they're taking. And I think it's a powerful opportunity also to be positive and encouraging. And, the words that you choose can really set the tone, whether they're feeling like they're making the right choice, or maybe they're apprehensive. And so if you're using exclamation points, or if you're using things that make them feel good about pressing that button, that can also sort of speak to their emotions and hopefully make them feel like they're moving forward in a positive direction. There's so many examples like that, where when you're designing, you're really working around people's emotions.
Yep.
People arrive on your website and they're either confused and looking for information to solve their problem, or they're curious and they're open-minded. And you can either lose that curiosity and sort of turn people away, or you can tap into it.
That's really, again, every time I kind of consume any of your stuff about this, I'm always like, oh yeah, I'm like furiously writing down notes. Kind of before we get into some of the latter half of the stuff, how did you get to work for SiteGround? Like, what's your background, particularly with this area? How did you come into this?
Right. So by training, I'm a writer. So I worked in journalism for a while, and then I transitioned into more corporate communications and working on and sort of that turned into marketing. But I didn't really get into the tech industry with a marketing mind frame, from day one. I sort of came at this through a couple of different steps, and I actually think that it's really helped me. So my background in writing and information transmission, that's what journalism is. You really want to answer everyone's questions in an article that's engaging and interesting. And when we think about the web right now, that's a pretty interesting approach to take and a good skill set to have. So I'm sort of wearing that hat when I work in web design and in UX design. And so the opportunity to blend those and to help the internet and help websites be more engaging for people and help information circulate more easily is something I'm pretty passionate about. And then as I worked with websites a little bit more, like I understood more what microcopy was and how powerful it could be. And just by coaching people and helping other people who are building websites to refine that is sort of how this talk came to be. And I realized that not many people were focusing on it. I'd been to a ton of UX design talks. I'd been to a lot of talks given by developers on how to make a really great WooCommerce store and a really great checkout cart process, but no one was really zeroing in and narrowing in on the words that we were using. And so I've been able to give this talk a couple of times, and every time I'm really excited to see people light up and think, this is something that I knew sort of abstractly existed, and I knew that it was important, but I didn't really know a word for it, and I didn't really understand how to make a difference and how I could really change my site through microcopy. And at SiteGround, I am the chief content creator, so I work on a ton of different projects. I work from editing blog posts to refining our marketing message in brochures. I work a lot on the events as well, so I kind of touch a lot of things, but UX design was something that I was interested in doing, and so I've been able, through my job, to get more exposure to that as well.
It's fascinating with your background, particularly as a journalist, like you say, writing and actually trying to get a message across and help people understand something. One of the big problems I've seen with a lot of sites, beyond like marketing and service sites, just sites in general, is people make the assumption that the reader will know exactly who they are and what to do, and won't really hold their hand through the process. And people can get very lost kind of at that first landing page.
Yes, absolutely. We're really working in a time right now where there's information overload.
Yeah.
And like, absolutely, you're competing not just with other businesses that do similar things. You're competing with, if someone has their TV on or they have their cell phone next to them, they have just the busyness of their everyday lives. You're competing for their attention in all sorts of ways, and your competition might not be what you thought it was. Yeah. And so you have to work extra hard to engage someone. And the cognitive effort that it takes to navigate a site that's not well designed, like, it seems like a big word, but it really, I think, makes a lot of sense when you think of the attention that it might take. If you're having a hard time navigating a site, you really have to focus. And if the reward isn't there, if there's no payoff, people are going to navigate away. So you want to reduce that cognitive effort that's required to do anything on your site. And so small helpful hints and tips and instructions and positive words and encouraging, accurate labels on your site are all just ways to sort of help people who are distracted to like pay more attention and to be more engaged in your content and in your site. And that will help you be more successful as well.
And this is why I was so staggered that even as someone who builds, I don't know, it feels like 100 billion funnels, but at no point, we used to talk a lot about like the call to action button. That's pretty important. And we'd say, oh, should it say get access now? Like I said, like add to cart or whatever. But then we were going through and like the checkout page, for example, when it has like 100% safe, like 30-day guarantee, I was like, well, that counts. There's a 2-3 word sentence there that conveys a huge amount of meaning behind it. And yet, again, we're pretty happy just to use templated stuff, what we see other people use, and maybe half that is because it works, but it should really be something that people pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of times where these templates are designed by professionals who have thought about these things. And so I think there's room to sort of borrow from other people who've come to conclusions and done the tests for you. But there's also absolutely room to come up with your own ideas and come up with your own creative approaches to what might work for your business. And so, an example like a return policy or a 30-day money-back guarantee policy, I think that these are examples of things that probably work and have worked. But then they might stop working because people don't trust them anymore because everyone has them.
Sure.
So it's such a tricky industry because even though something might become a standard for a while, people will get fatigue of seeing the same things and they won't even see them anymore. And so you're working against these changing trends and these changing best practices and working against basically what everyone else in the industry is doing because, you know, people will sort of stop paying attention if they keep seeing the same words over and over again. So it's really tricky. I kind of feel like I contradict myself all the time when I say be consistent, but then target to your audience and, you know, use best practices, but be innovative as well and pay attention. So it's a lot of basically making sure that you are, I think the number one tip is to pay attention, to know that these are things that you can change and that you should be making sure that they're still working for you and that you remember that you can edit your microcopy on your site, you know, and to just be paying attention to how it's performing. That's the best thing, really.
Kind of again, and this was a question, I apologize because it was a tricky question at WordCamp, so I'm kind of throwing this at you as well. Is a lot of the guys, a couple of people asked the question about, should it be so specific to an audience, the microcopy, that would almost reach, without wanting to be too clever about it, like meme status, like it's almost so specific to that niche or that audience. Can you talk a little bit about that? I kind of don't want to say too much about it.
I think that's a really dangerous game to play. I think if you are trying things that you know are very specific and that are going after a very narrow target audience, then there's room to do that. I think if we're thinking about campaigns, for example, maybe you have a business that you're very confident and grounded in your brand persona and your brand voice as a company. However, you want to try something in a campaign sort of setting where you target maybe a new audience, or you want to try something that's a little bit different, see if you can get the attention of an audience that wasn't familiar with you before. These are opportunities to try things that are a little wacky and a little maybe more, you know, like trendy and meme driven culture, and that won't be relevant within a few months. You just have to know where to put your effort as well. Don't invest a ton of money and time into something that's not going to last or that you're not going to be able to build on. But if you want to go and try something that you end up using words that are extremely specific and that might turn a lot of people off, but that really might work for a specific audience, I think there's absolutely room for that. I would just caution not to sort of pivot your entire company structure towards something that might be a little bit too fleeting, and to rewrite everything and narrow into like a more niche audience than you might have intended to. So I would say just to be careful, but I think there's room for both. Yeah,
that's fair. No, I like that's perfect, and frankly exactly what I wanted to hear as well, because we've been trying to move away from doing some of that stuff. That's really good. What else do we need to know, kind of beginning to wrap this up? We've done our audit, and seeing the traffic on the page, that makes a huge amount of sense as to where to focus. Something I've been this is why I like doing these podcasts, because I basically get free consultation. Do we look at, and maybe there isn't an answer to this, let's say we've got 5 pages that has the most amount of our traffic. Do we look at changing consistently the buttons across those individual pages, or do we look at first something that might affect all pages, like our menu first and our footer? Is there a way to balance that? Is there any kind of best practice on what you've seen work? Open that up.
I think it depends on whether you are result focused or if you are trying to build something long term. I think that I'm not going to give a perfect answer because it always depends. Tough, It always depends, and it always depends also on who's making the decisions in your company and how do they feel about these things. So it's not like an easy decision to make, but I like to look at it in a way that, are you building your website for brand longevity? Are you building it where you're trying to build up this brand recognition and sort of a sense of trust? In which case, I think those high-level changes like your menu and your footer and things that are going to be a little bit longer lasting are good places to start, because those are foundations for how you're going to be perceived, and will also allow you to set the tone as you build new pages and new products. And even as you onboard new writers or new team members, they're going to also be gleaning that information from your site. And so if you're putting the effort into building a really solid foundation, then that's just going to help you overall. Now, if you are a serial entrepreneur and you're just trying to like test and validate your hypothesis, and you're just looking to build like a minimum viable product, then you might not want to invest all this time into something that might die and you'll or rebrand into something different down the line. So I think that the answer is different for different types of businesses. And so you just need to decide, am I building this one brand that I want to expand on? Or am I trying a ton of things, seeing what sticks, and building something from there?
No, and again, that's it's almost like you do this for a living. I kind of wanted to show that there isn't a set answer, particularly for copy in general. It's like such a huge part of it. But I think a lot of people look for quick fixes. They're like, oh, should I say download now, or should I say sign up? And I'm like, well, what do you want to say? What do your customers want to read? What's the next step? It becomes, I think the problem with something like microcopy is people almost try to commoditize the result and say, this is what you should be doing to that wording, as opposed to, like you say, looking at, well, actually, what's the strategy? What's the long-term goal for page? And like you say, a lot of it's about user experience, right? Moving people through that process. So I think that's really useful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So anything else just to kind of wrap that up, like any common mistakes that you see? To be honest, I could kind of listen to you talk about this all day, so we're gonna have to wrap this up for your sake, not so much mine. Is there anything else that you kind of want to finish up on?
Yeah, I just kind of want to encourage people that there are some easy things to fix in your website that don't require a lot of skill. But don't be afraid to reach out to developers, or if you're working with someone who's more hands-on in the code, and ask them to collaborate with you, because I can look at a menu item and know exactly how to edit it, but I might encounter an error message, for example, as I'm going through a website or a checkout. And if I don't know how to edit that error message, I know there's someone that does, but I just
That's such a good point.
And so don't get discouraged if you see bits of text and think, oh, I'll never be able to edit that because I just don't know how. I think it's worth like writing it down and contacting your developer, hiring a developer, and helping getting the help that you need to go through your website and get into the code and see where those text pieces are being generated. And then you can start, adding them to your content list and your content audit, and start reworking those things. So error messages are a big one. Sometimes I encounter error messages I didn't even know existed in websites that I work with. And so, I have gotten better and better at contacting the developers and saying, listen, I'd love to go through this flow with you and look at these error messages and seeing what we're telling our customers and our audiences, so that I can make sure that messaging matches the rest of our strategy.
Yeah, such a good. It's also when people have like a 404 page that they've paid attention to. That to me is like so set, and I don't do it. I should look at it. Falls under that same bracket of like. That's such a good point. The error messages, because they are everywhere, like on forms and things that don't load.
Absolutely.
Man.
Yeah, and it can be intimidating when you're not sure where they're coming from, but. But yeah, I would say, even if it feels like it's falling out of your realm of expertise or your comfort level with website design, I'd say just, make sure you're getting the help that you need to do all of it, because at the end of the day, an error message can really make a big difference on how your website performs.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrea, for coming on and talking to us through this, because genuinely, I'm kind of hoping there's more stuff out there about this, particularly from yourself, because it is so interesting. How can people reach out to you? You're obviously with SiteGround. Like, if people want to know more about you, how do people get in touch?
Yeah, so I am on Twitter, so you can find me at Andrea Zoellner on Twitter. And I'm happy also if you want to email me, andrea.zoellner@siteground.com is the best way to reach me. But yeah, and maybe I'll see someone at a WordCamp. If you do see me, I'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, and obviously I think your WordCamp London one was recorded, so I'll put the link to that down below. I think it's on YouTube as like a live stream. But thank you so much for coming on. Massively appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Good, I'm glad.